Climate change is the big issue of the day. In fact, the government is getting increasingly shrill about climate change and what we, the people, must do to change our lives and save the planet. How do you think the government's going to get on with that message now that we know that Alok Sharma, the climate change minister, went to 30 countries in seven months, jet-setting around the world, doing nothing to help the environment. Plus, he avoided the quarantine that the rest of us have to go into. Plus, we find out that the climate change czar of the government, Allegra Stratton, drives a diesel car. Boris churns out kids at an alarming rate. He's not doing much to save the planet either, is he? Why are we supposed to do everything when this government clearly doesn't feel it's incumbent on itself to do anything?
You know, the hypocrisy of all this just absolutely stinks. And there's always been a large element of hypocrisy in the environmentalist movement. I mean, you only have to think about someone like Emma Thompson, who flew from the United States to London so that she could take part in a climate change demonstration. And environmentalism is full of this kind of stuff. It's a rich man's game, essentially. It's a way for wealthy people to feel good about themselves, to make rules for the rest of us that we are expected to live by, but they are not expected to live by. And Alok Sharma really sums that up. This is someone who is going on and on about the end of the world that will apparently be brought about by climate change unless we all change our behavior. And there he is, jet-setting and driving and doing all the kinds of things that they frown upon us for doing. So the hypocrisy is off the scale. I think it's off a piece with environmentalism more broadly, which is an increasingly hypocritical movement.
Yeah, I mean, the government is in danger of sort of turning into the political equivalent of those lunatics who stand outside Parliament and stations with sort of placards saying the end of the world is nigh. And Sharma coming out this weekend to defend his jet-setting global travel, saying what I do is crucial. This is the last chance to save the world. I mean, do these people remotely understand how much this does not ring true with ordinary people who can't afford electric cars and who can't afford brand new expensive hydrogen boilers?
It just doesn't ring true with people at all. You know, there's an element of hysteria to all of this. It does feel like an end of the world cult. You know, all these people going around telling us that unless we self-flagellate for our eco-sins and stop driving our car so much and stop going on holiday, then the world will boil to death and we will all die. I mean, it's a really kind of cultish, religious, hysterical movement. That's what it looks like to me. And the thing that's really getting on my nerves at the moment is all this apocalypse porn. I think we have to call it apocalypse porn. All these people online in the media, they're lapping up the wildfires in Greece, in Turkey, for example, and Greece. They're talking about the floods in Europe, the fires in America, and everything like this that happens. They instantly point to it and say, this is the end of the world that we warned you about. This is proof that nature is punishing mankind. Of course, if you look at the statistics, the number of people who die from natural catastrophes has plummeted over the past 100 years. We're far safer from nature than we've ever been before, precisely because humankind has progressed so much, and these people hate progress. So they just make things up. But the way in which this apocalypse porn, this yearning for proof that the world is coming to an end, it's really off-putting. And I think most people look at this stuff and just think it sounds completely mad.
Why do Boris and his gang feel that green issues are so crucial to people? I don't believe that they are. I mean, when you conduct a poll of people and you go around saying, would you like to save the planet or would you like the planet to be destroyed? Obviously, they're going to pick the former. But is it really a priority for most people, the planet, the climate change alleged emergency? No, it's not. This is what I believe people are interested in. Keeping a roof over their head, paying the mortgage, keeping a job, keeping food on their children's tables, all the basics, law and order. The idea that it is the top priority for ordinary people is just nonsense. It's a fallacy.
Complete nonsense. You know, this saving the planet, as they call it, is just a hobby for posh people. It's just a pastime for the well-off middle classes who don't really have very much else to worry about. They like to feel like they're part of some great big movement to save the planet from the evil humankind. It's a fantasy. It's a fantasy engaged in by time-rich liberals and time-rich middle-class people. That's all there is to it. Working-class people aren't thinking about this stuff. They're thinking about making ends meet, carrying on having a job into the future, buying a house. People in the developing world certainly aren't thinking about it. They're thinking about the industrialization they need and the progress they need so that they can finally catch up with us. This is a conceit of people who are well off and have too much time on their hands. The shocking thing is that Boris and his government are increasingly pushing this agenda too, because, you know, Boris used to be one of the strongest critics of environmentalist politics. He used to be a pretty good critic of climate change alarmism, and now he's fallen for it hook, line and sinker. So that's depressing, the fact that whatever party you vote for these days, you end up with the Green Party. They all support green politics. They don't subject these ideas to public debate, and we're all expected to go along with it. And I think a lot of people don't go along with it.
I'm sure they don't. And because of environmentalism, the government feels it's incumbent upon it to be illiberal towards us, to bring in laws, systems, you know, the low neighborhood traffic schemes, the traffic lanes, the cycle lanes, the pedestrian areas, none of which any of us voted for, and yet they've been imposed on us. It seems to me that environmentalism, or this green nonsense, is an excuse for a government to be illiberal, and this government's tendency towards illiberalism, I think, is getting increasingly concerning.
Absolutely. There's always been a very strong authoritarian element in environmentalist politics. If you look at the way they talk about climate change deniers, which basically means anyone who criticizes any aspect of the political ideology of environmentalism. So they will no doubt call you and me climate change deniers, and there are arguments that people like us should be censored, we should be deprived of a platform. There was even an article published a few years ago by a leading Green who said that there should be a criminal tribunal to put climate change deniers on trial. You know, basically a 21st century inquisition to punish these people for their speech crimes. So there's always been an authoritarian element. They also want to limit international travel, hike up the prices of flying around the world so that essentially poorer people could no longer travel abroad. They bring in these low traffic neighborhoods and other mechanisms that are undemocratic and authoritarian in the sense that they limit our choices. So environmentalism is an authoritarian movement. It's about the elites telling the rest of us how we ought to live and what we are allowed to say. And I think pushing back against that at the moment is very important, especially now that the government itself is really pushing this agenda.
Yeah, and I don't deny climate change. I'm dubious, sceptical about how much mankind is responsible for that change. The climate of this planet always has changed, and it always will. Whether or not anything we can do as a species will make any difference, we're yet to find out. But I'll tell you what I do deny, Brendan, and that is that anything we do in this country will make a blind bit of difference. We produce less than 2% of the world's pollution, and therefore, unless we can persuade China to get on board with all this climate change claptrap, nothing will happen, nothing will change. China isn't even coming to COP26, nor has it submitted its proposals for what it wants to do about the climate change alleged emergency. So we are just taking part as this government tries to reduce our lives, make our lives worse to save the planet. It's a pure virtue signalling project.
Yeah, like you, I don't deny climate change. Something's obviously happening. The question of why it's happening and what can be done about it, that's a very different question entirely. And that's something that should be up for rigorous public debate rather than always being silenced by the environmentalist extremists. But you're right, you know, what can the UK do fundamentally to transform the planet? Very little, as it happens, especially because, you know, if you look at industrializing juggernauts like China and India and Brazil as well, you know, these countries which are growing enormously and becoming more economically powerful, they are emitting, especially China, they are emitting a huge amount of carbon. I'm not actually opposed to that. I think it's every country's right to go through what we went through 150 years ago, the Industrial Revolution, which propelled us into the comforts we enjoy today. This is what environmentalists forget when they're on their iPhones campaigning to limit CO2. If we hadn't gone through the Industrial Industrial Revolution, we'd all still be living on tiny farms and dying at the age of 35. You know, industrialization and progress did a great deal for humankind. It's China's right and India's right and Brazil's right and every other country's right to go through that same process and to enrich themselves in the way that we did. But you're right, you know, in that kind of world, when Western nations gather together, Western nations which are increasingly less productive than they used to be in the past, there's very little that they can do. It's just a form of self-flagellation. This is virtue signaling mixed with self-flagellation. It's the West saying we're giving up on the project of modernity and industry, and we're going to hit ourselves over the back for being such disgusting pollutants. It's a waste of time. It's a ridiculous spectacle, and we should call it out.